The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself with trumpets and flashing lights. It creeps up on you slowly, like sand filling your shoes at the beach, grain by grain, until suddenly you're walking on broken glass and wondering when everything turns sharp. That's exactly what happened to me on what was supposed to be a perfect Saturday afternoon at Santa Cruz Beach. Watching my wife of 12 years arch her back like a cat in heat, while some spray-tanned real estate broker's hands explored her skin like he was surveying property he planned to acquire. Let me back up because this story doesn't start at the beach, even though that's where everything exploded into fragments, too small to piece back together. My name is Garrett Wilson. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the better part of my adult life believing that if you work hard, treat people with respect, and build something solid, the universe won't tear it down just for entertainment. Turns out the universe has a sick sense of humor, and my wife Lauren had been the punchline I was too busy to notice. We met in college. The usual story that sounds romantic until it curdles into something else entirely. She was studying marketing, I was deep into computer science, and we bonded over late-night coffee runs and shared dreams about building a life that looked nothing like our parents' divorces. We promised each other honesty, transparency, all those words that sound meaningful when you're 23 and drunk on possibility. We got married at 26, bought our first house at 28, had Leo at 34, and Mia 2 years later. On paper, we were the American success story, the kind of couple that neighbors pointed to and said, "See, marriage can work." The cracks started small, so small I convinced myself they were just normal wear and tear. Lauren joined a new marketing firm about 18 months ago, one of those aggressive boutique agencies where everyone's always crushing it and disrupting the space. She started coming home later, talking faster, drinking more wine, and spending more time on her phone with a small smile that never quite reached her eyes when I walked into the room. When I asked about her day, I got highlight reels instead of real conversations, carefully edited performances where she played the role of successful working mom, while I apparently had a supporting part I didn't remember auditioning for. Then came Becca Hunt, her new best friend from the office, a 37-year-old chaos merchant who treated other people's marriages like reality television she could binge watch and discuss over brunch. Becca had been through 2 divorces herself and seemed determined to collect more catastrophes, like some people collect vintage wines. She had this way of talking that made destruction sound like liberation, calling affairs reclaiming your power, and lying to your spouse, protecting your authentic self. Lauren started parroting her phrases, and I watched my wife slowly become a stranger wearing familiar clothes. The beach trip was Becca's idea naturally. She'd organized this group outing, a friend's celebration that somehow included Kyle Pendleton, a 35-year-old real estate agent who drove a leased Mercedes and wore sunglasses that cost more than they had any right to. Kyle was the kind of guy who called everyone brother or boss and thought personal boundaries were just suggestions for people without confidence. He'd been showing up at our house for work meetings with Lauren, always staying just a bit too long, laughing just a bit too loud, and standing just a bit too close. When I mentioned this to Lauren, she'd rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't fall out of her head and told me I was being insecure and controlling, that Kyle was an important client and I was embarrassing her with my jealousy. So there we were on Santa Cruz Beach on a Saturday in late July, the kind of perfect California day that shows up in tourism commercials. The sun was high and hot, the ocean was doing its eternal rhythm thing, and families were scattered across the sand like dropped puzzle pieces. Leo and Mia were building an elaborate sandcastle with Becca's kids, their laughter cutting through the sound of waves. Lauren had spread out her towel in her new bikini, the expensive one she'd treated herself to, with money from an account I'd later discover she'd been steadily draining. Becca was holding court nearby, talking about some drama at her gym, and Kyle was holding a beer and looking like he'd just won something. I was setting up our umbrella when I heard Lauren call out, her voice doing that artificially sweet thing it does when she wants something. "Kyle, honey, could you be a sweetheart and help me with my sunscreen? I can never reach my back properly, and Garrett's busy with the umbrella." The way she said my name, like I was the help she'd hired for the day, should have been my first clue. The way Kyle's face lit up like Christmas morning should have been my second. I watched him walk over, that confident swagger that guys like him, perfect in mirrors, and pick up the sunscreen bottle. He made a show of warming it up in his hands, which was already unnecessary and weird, before kneeling behind Lauren in the sand. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, exposing her neck and shoulders, and she was looking out at the ocean with a small smile playing on her lips. Kyle squirted the coconut-scented lotion into his palm and started applying it to her shoulders with slow, deliberate movements that had absolutely nothing to do with sun protection and everything to do with marking territory. His hands moved lower, following the curve of her shoulder blades, his fingers spreading wider as they traveled down her spine. Lauren arched her back slightly, a movement so subtle most people wouldn't notice. But I'd been married to this woman for 12 years and I knew every gesture in her repertoire. This wasn't casual acceptance of help. This was invitation. Kyle's hands reached the small of her back, his fingers hooking slightly under the edge of her bikini bottom, tugging the fabric down just a fraction of an inch before smoothing the sunscreen along the exposed skin there. "Right there?" Kyle asked, his voice dropping into that lower register that men use when they're pretending something inappropriate is perfectly innocent. His hand was still resting on her lower back, thumb moving in small circles that had nothing to do with sun protection and everything to do with staking a claim. Lauren leaned back slightly into his touch, her eyes closing for just a moment before she answered. Perfect," she practically purred, and something inside me clicked into place with the finality of a lock engaging. This wasn't the first time they'd touched each other like this. This was practiced, familiar, the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes from repetition. I walked over slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the hot sand between my toes and the cold fury settling into my bones. My shadow fell across them, blocking out the sun, and I watched Kyle's hand freeze on Lauren's skin. He looked up at me with that same cocky smile he probably used on difficult clients, the one that said he could talk his way out of anything. "Hey, brother, just helping your lady out here," Kyle said, his hand still on my wife's back like he'd paid for the privilege. "You know how it is, these ladies in their hard-to-reach spots?" He actually winked at me. This walking cologne advertisement actually had the audacity to wink while his hand was on my wife's nearly naked body. I looked at Lauren, waiting for her to feel ashamed, to move away, to acknowledge that this had crossed about 17 different lines. Instead, she sat up fast, grabbing her sunglasses and shoving them on her face like armor, and launched into an attack that would have made Becca proud. "Garrett, oh my God, seriously? You're standing there like some kind of prison guard glaring at everyone?" Her voice was sharp and loud, designed to draw attention, to make me the villain in whatever story she was spinning. "I asked Kyle to put sunscreen on my back because you were busy. That's it. That's literally all that happened. But of course, you have to turn it into some kind of federal investigation because you're so insecure and jealous that you can't handle me having male friends." The word friends hit me like a slap. Friends. As if friendship involved hands sliding into swimsuit territory while making bedroom eyes at each other. A few people on nearby blankets were starting to look over, drawn by Lauren's rising voice and probably expecting some entertaining beach drama to spice up their Saturday. "You're making a scene," Lauren continued, standing up now, brushing sand off her legs with aggressive swipes. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Kyle is a client of my firm. We're trying to enjoy a nice day at the beach, and you're acting like I'm committing some kind of crime by asking for help with sunscreen. This is exactly why I don't want to do things with you anymore. You suck all the fun out of everything with your paranoia and your attitude." I looked at her standing there, my wife of 12 years, mother of my 2 children, and I realized I was looking at a stranger who'd been slowly replacing the woman I married. The real Lauren, the one I'd fallen in love with, wouldn't have let another man's hands wander on her body. She wouldn't have gaslit me into believing that what I'd just witnessed was innocent. She wouldn't have chosen to humiliate me in public rather than acknowledge a boundary had been crossed. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Something fundamental and irreversible. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion, knowing you can't stop it and shouldn't try. The pain I'd been carrying for months, the doubt, the questions I'd been afraid to ask, all of it crystallized into perfect, cold clarity. My wife was having an affair with Kyle, Probably had been for months, and Becca had been covering for her, enabling her, maybe even living vicariously through her betrayal. "We're leaving," I said quietly, checking my watch like this was just another schedule adjustment. "You have 10 minutes to get your things and get the kids. We're going home right now." Lauren's mouth dropped open in theatrical shock. "Excuse me? You don't get to just order me around like I'm one of your employees. I'm not going anywhere. The kids are having fun. Everyone's having a good time except you because you're determined to ruin it." I turned and walked toward where Leo and Mia were playing, their sandcastle now featuring an elaborate moat system that had them completely absorbed. I knelt down next to them, my back to Lauren and her friends, and spoke in that calm dad voice I'd perfected over the years. "Hey team, change of plans. We're going to head home a bit early today. Start packing up your toys, okay?" "Oh, but Dad, we're not done with the castle," Leo protested, his face smeared with sand and sunscreen. "I know, buddy, but sometimes plans change. We'll come back another day and build an even bigger one. I promise." The lie tasted bitter, knowing that future beach trips wouldn't include their mother, but I kept my voice steady and reassuring. Mia looked past me toward where Lauren was standing, arms crossed, and even at 6 years old, she seemed to sense the electricity in the air. "Is Mommy mad?" she asked quietly, her big eyes worried in that way that made my heart crack. "Mommy's fine, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups just need to go home earlier than planned. That's all." I helped them gather their buckets and shovels, ignoring Lauren's continued protest behind me, and Kyle's attempts to defuse the situation by suggesting we all just chill out and enjoy the day, brother. The walk back to the UA parking lot was excruciating. Lauren alternated between silent fury and loud declarations about how I was ruining everything, how controlling I was being, how I clearly had trust issues that I needed to work on. Becca chimed in with supportive murmurs, playing her role as enabler to perfection. Kyle trailed behind awkwardly, apparently realizing that his afternoon of public canoodling had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated. Other beachgoers watched our procession with that mixture of pity and entertainment that people reserve for other people's disasters. I loaded the kids into the back seat of our SUV, made sure they had their tablets and headphones, and started the engine without another word to Lauren. She climbed into the passenger seat, slamming the door hard enough to make the whole car shake, and immediately launched into her attack before we'd even left the parking lot. "I cannot believe you just did that. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? You drag me away from my friends like I'm some kind of child who can't make her own decisions." Her voice was shrill, that particular frequency that made my teeth ache. Kyle was literally just helping me with sunscreen. That's all it was. But you have to make everything into this huge drama because you're so insecure about yourself that you can't handle me having any kind of relationship with another man. I drove in silence, my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road ahead. Highway 17 stretched out before us, cutting through the mountains back toward home, and I focused on the white lines marking the lanes, finding something meditative about their steady rhythm. "Are you seriously going to ignore me right now?" Lauren demanded, her voice climbing higher. "This is so typical of you, just shutting down instead of talking about things like an adult. Do you know what Kyle must think? What Becca must think? You made me look like I'm married to some kind of controlling psychopath who can't handle his wife having friends." Still, I said nothing. In my peripheral vision, I could see her getting more agitated, her hands gesturing wildly, her face flushed with anger or embarrassment, or maybe both. Behind us in the back seat, I could hear the faint sound of Leo's video game and Mia's cartoon, and I was grateful for the headphones that shielded them from this conversation. "Say something," Lauren shouted, slapping her hand on the dashboard. "You can't just drag us all home early and then refuse to even talk about it. What is wrong with you?" I took a breath, kept my eyes on the road, and spoke with the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty. "You slept with him." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same emotional weight as, "We need gas," or "Traffic is heavy." I watched her reaction in my peripheral vision, saw the micro-expression of pure panic flash across her face before she locked it down and switched to righteous indignation. "What? Are you out of your mind? I can't believe you just accused me of that. You're actually insane. Her voice hit that screechy note that happens when someone's lying and knows they've been caught but is desperately trying to bluff their way through. Kyle is a client, a friend, and apparently that's too much for you to handle because you're so pathetically jealous and insecure that you can't stand the thought of me having any relationships outside of this marriage. You're lying, I said, still in that same flat, calm voice. You know you're lying. I know you're lying. And we're not going to discuss this in front of the children, but when we get home, you're going to pack a bag and go stay with Becca for a while. This is my house, Lauren screamed, all pretense of control evaporating. You can't kick me out of my own house. Who do you think you are? For now, it's our house, I replied, taking the exit toward our neighborhood. But that situation is temporary, and we both know it. You made choices, Lauren. You made a lot of choices, and now we're going to deal with the consequences of those choices. But not in front of Leo and Mia. Whatever else happens, they don't need to watch their family implode in real time. The rest of the drive home happened in poisoned silence. Lauren stared out the passenger window, her jaw clenched, her whole body vibrating with suppressed fury. I pulled into our driveway, helped the kids out of the car, and sent them inside to wash the sand off and start on homework while I dealt with their mother. Lauren stood in the garage, arms crossed, that defiant stance she'd perfected. I'm not going anywhere. You can't make me leave my own home, Garrett. You think you can just make declarations and I'll fall in line? This isn't the 1800s. I have rights. I have a lawyer on speed dial if you try anything. I looked at her, really looked at her, this woman I'd built a life with, and felt absolutely nothing. The love had cauterized itself somewhere between the beach and this moment, leaving behind only the cold necessity of cleanup work. Call your lawyer, I said. Call anyone you want. But tonight you're leaving, because if you stay here, I'm going to say things that can't be unsaid. And I'd prefer to have those conversations through attorneys rather than traumatizing our children. Pack a bag, Lauren. I'll make sure you have everything you need. But you're not sleeping in this house tonight. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced her that I wasn't negotiating. I was informing. She stormed past me into the house, and I heard her throwing things around upstairs in our bedroom, the sounds of drawers slamming and closet doors banging serving as her tantrum soundtrack. 30 minutes later, she dragged a suitcase down the stairs, mascara smeared under her eyes from angry tears, and stood at the front door like she was expecting me to crack, to apologize, to beg her to stay. When I said nothing, just held the door open and waited. She grabbed her keys from the bowl by the entrance and walked out without another word. Her exit punctuated by the slam of her car door and the screech of tires as she peeled out of the driveway. I closed the door, locked it, and stood in the silence of my house, listening to the sounds of my children playing upstairs, blissfully unaware that their world had just fundamentally changed. Then I walked to my home office, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my computer to start collecting evidence. Because whatever war Lauren was about to wage, I wasn't going to fight it unarmed and unprepared. My job is cybersecurity, which is a fancy way of saying I get paid to think like criminals and build walls they can't climb. Lauren had forgotten this during her affair, or maybe she'd never really understood what I did beyond something with computers. She'd used our shared cloud storage for everything, backed up her phone automatically, and apparently believed that deleting text messages meant they were actually gone forever, which is adorable in the way that watching someone try to hide in a room made entirely of glass is adorable. I started with the easy stuff, the breadcrumbs she'd left scattered across our digital life like Hansel and Gretel's trail through the forest. Her text messages with Becca were a goldmine of incrimination, screenshots of conversations where they discussed Kyle like he was some kind of prize they'd won, celebrating each milestone of the affair, like teenage girls planning a school dance. He's so different from Garrett, Lauren had written to Becca 3 months earlier. He makes me feel alive again, like I'm not just someone's wife and someone's mother. When I'm with Kyle, I'm just Lauren, and she's exciting and desired and free. Becca's response was equally illuminating. You deserve this. Garrett's a good provider, but let's be honest, he's boring. Kyle is fun. Life is short. Take what makes you happy. I screenshot everything, methodically building my case file, each conversation another nail in the coffin of our marriage. There were dozens of them, hundreds of messages chronicling the evolution of her betrayal from emotional affair to physical one, from stolen moments to elaborate lies about late meetings and conference trips that I could now trace back to hotel rooms and weekend getaways. The financial records were even more damning. Lauren had been siphoning money from our savings account for months, small amounts at first that I'd barely noticed, then increasingly large withdrawals that she'd labeled as consultancy fees or networking expenses. I pulled up the bank records and started matching dates to credit card statements, watching the pattern emerge with the clarity of a mathematical proof. $47,000. That's what the affair had cost. Money that was supposed to be for the kids' college funds, for our future, for the security we'd been in, building together for 12 years. Instead, it had paid for hotel suites in Monterey, dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, gifts that Kyle had probably accepted with that same smug smile he'd worn while rubbing sunscreen on my wife's back. I screenshotted everything, printed out the most damning statements, and added them to my growing file. Then I moved to the photos, and this is where things got interesting in the way that car crashes are interesting. Lauren's phone backed up automatically to our shared cloud, and she'd apparently forgotten to change the settings after her affair started. The geolocation data on her photos told stories her mouth would have denied. Her business trip to San Francisco 3 months ago had actually been a weekend at Kyle's apartment in Oakland, the GPS coordinates matching perfectly to an address I'd never heard of until I ran it through public records. The photos from that weekend showed her in lingerie I'd never seen, making expressions I hadn't seen directed at me in years, looking like someone who'd successfully gotten away with something and was enjoying every second of it. I spent 3 days in that office, sleeping on the couch, eating takeout that I barely tasted, compiling a dossier that would have made my most paranoid clients proud. Lauren tried calling, then texting, oscillating between apologetic and accusatory with such speed it gave me whiplash just reading the messages. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say yet, not until I had all my pieces in place. "Garrett, please, can we talk about this like adults?" One text read. 20 minutes later, "You're being completely unreasonable and childish. I'm coming home tomorrow whether you like it or not." Then, "The kids are asking about me. You can't keep them from their mother. I'll call CPS if I have to." Then, "I know you're reading these. The silent treatment is abuse. You know that, right? You're abusing me by refusing to communicate." And finally, late on the third night, "Becca says you blocked our credit cards. You can't do that. That's financial abuse. I'm going to talk to my lawyer about this." That last one made me smile. Actually smile for the first time in 3 days. The credit cards. She'd finally noticed. I'd frozen all our joint accounts after discovering that she'd been using them to subsidize Kyle's lifestyle, putting restaurant bills and hotel rooms on cards that I paid off every month while thinking we were just having a financially expensive year. The bank had been very understanding when I'd explained that I'd noticed suspicious activity and wanted to protect our accounts while I sorted things out. They didn't need to know that the suspicious activity was my wife's affair. They just needed to know that I wanted those cards frozen immediately, which they'd done with impressive efficiency. On the fourth morning, Lauren called at 6:30, and this time I answered, putting her on speaker while I made coffee in my empty kitchen. "You blocked my cards," she said without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You actually blocked my access to our money. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was when my card got declined at the grocery store yesterday? People were staring at me. Garrett." "The cards are frozen due to suspicious activity," I replied, pouring water into the coffee maker with steady hands. $47,000 in unauthorized withdrawals over 6 months counts as suspicious activity, wouldn't you say? The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough for the coffee maker to start gurgling. When Lauren spoke again, her voice had changed, dropped into that lower register that meant she knew she'd been caught, but was going to try to lawyer her way out of it anyway. "Those were legitimate business expenses and personal purchases. I don't need your permission to spend money from our joint account, Garrett. It's my money too. Your business expenses included a 4-day stay at a resort in Carmel that happened to coincide with Kyle taking a vacation to the same location? I asked conversationally, taking my first sip of coffee and savoring the bitter burn. Your personal purchases included jewelry and watches that I've never seen you wear, but that Kyle seemed to be sporting in his Instagram posts around the same time the charges appeared? Would you like me to continue, or should we just acknowledge that we both know exactly what's been happening and move forward accordingly? Another long silence, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head, trying to find an angle, a story, a way to spin this that didn't make her the villain. She couldn't find one. There wasn't one. "What do you want?" she finally asked, and the fight had gone out of her voice, replaced by something that might have been fear or might have been calculation. With Lauren these days, it was hard to tell the difference. "I want you to talk to a lawyer. A good one. Better than you can probably afford now that your discretionary spending account has been suspended. I want you to prepare for a divorce that's going to be fast, clean, and decidedly in my favor. And I want you to start thinking about how you're going to explain to Leo and Mia why mommy doesn't live with them anymore. You can't take my children away from me." Lauren's voice spiked back up into hysteria. "No judge is going to give you full custody just because I made a mistake. I'm their mother. You're a mother who stole money from her children's future to fund an affair with a real estate agent who's probably already moved on to his next target." I replied, still in that same calm, factual tone. "You're a mother who chose to publicly humiliate her husband in front of witnesses and then gaslight him about what everyone saw. You're a mother who's been lying to her family for at least 6 months, maybe longer. So yeah, Lauren, let's go in front of a judge and see how that plays out. I've got documentation, I've got witnesses, and I've got a stable home environment that hasn't been compromised by an ongoing affair. What do you have?" She hung up. I finished my coffee, got the kids ready for school, and went to work like it was any other day, because compartmentalization is a valuable skill when your personal life is actively exploding around you. But I wasn't done with Kyle yet. That came later, at a bar called Harbor Line, after I'd spent a week watching his social media, tracking his patterns, figuring out where he liked to hold court with his equally vapid friends who thought selling houses made them important. Kyle was a creature of habit, and his habit was holding court every Thursday night at the same bar, drinking the same overpriced whiskey and telling the same stories about his conquests to an audience that laughed because laughing was easier than calling him out on his casual cruelty. I walked into Harbor Line at 8:15, wearing jeans and a black jacket, looking nothing like the uptight husband Kyle had probably dismissed in his mind as easily dealt with. The bar was crowded, full of the after-work crowd trying to pretend they had exciting lives by drinking in dim lighting and talking loudly over generic rock music. Kyle was exactly where I'd expected him to be, center table, holding court, his voice carrying across the space as he told what I immediately recognized as the story of my humiliation at the beach. So this dude, this absolute specimen of insecurity, is just standing there watching me put sunscreen on his wife like I'm committing a federal crime, Kyle was saying, gesturing with his glass. His audience of 3 equally shallow-looking guys hanging on every word. "And she's gorgeous, right? This woman is fine, and she's clearly into me, and this guy can't handle it. He just stands there like a deer in headlights while she's telling him he's being ridiculous and jealous. I mean, what kind of man can't satisfy his wife enough that she's looking elsewhere? You know what I'm saying?" His friends laughed, the ugly kind of laughter that men use when they're bonding over someone else's pain. I walked over slowly, deliberately, my footsteps absorbed by the noise in the carpet, until I was standing right behind one of Kyle's friends. Then I pulled out the empty chair directly across from Kyle, turned it around backwards, and sat down straddling it. My arms folded across the back, my face completely neutral. The laughter died like someone had cut the power. Kyle's smile froze on his face, his whiskey glass halfway to his mouth, and I watched the color drain out of his spray-tan complexion as he processed who was sitting across from him. His friends exchanged glances, that universal guy language of, "Is this about to be a problem?" traveling between them without words. "Hey, brother," Kyle tried, his voice slightly higher than it had been during his story. "I wasn't," I mean, we were just, how's my wife's back? I interrupted, my voice conversational, like I was asking about the weather or the score of last night's game. Did the sunscreen work? She didn't burn, did she? I'd hate to think your efforts were wasted. Kyle set his drink down slowly, like he was dealing with a bomb that might go off if he moved too fast. Listen, man, that whole thing was just a misunderstanding. Lauren and I are just friends, you know how it is. Friends, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. Is that what we're calling it? Because I've seen the receipts, Kyle. I've seen exactly what kind of friendship you two have been conducting with my family's money. $12,000 over 3 months. Hotels, restaurants. That watch you're wearing right now that costs more than most people make in a month. All charged to accounts that I was paying off. All while you were pretending to be just another one of Lauren's professional contacts. The table had gone completely silent. One of Kyle's friends started to slide his chair back, probably sensing that this conversation was about to go somewhere he didn't want to be a witness to. I didn't look at him, kept my eyes locked on Kyle, watching the thoughts race across his face as he tried to calculate his next move. I don't know what you think you know, Kyle started, but I cut him off by laying a single piece of paper on the table between us. It was a printout of a credit card statement with certain charges highlighted in yellow, dates and amounts that told a story Kyle couldn't talk his way out of. This is just one statement, I said quietly, leaning forward slightly. I have 6 months of them. Every hotel room, every dinner, every gift you accepted from my wife while she was stealing from her children's college fund to make you feel like the big man you're clearly not. See, Kyle, here's the thing about being a cybersecurity specialist. I'm very, very good at finding digital trails that people think they've erased, and you two left a trail wide enough to drive a truck through. Kyle's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. His hand was shaking slightly when he reached for his drink again, and I felt a cold satisfaction watching him realize that this wasn't going to be something he could smooth talk or charm his way past. What do you want? He asked, dropping the brother routine and the fake casual attitude. Are you here to fight me? Because I'll call the cops right now if you're threatening me. Fight you? I leaned back slightly, my expression genuinely puzzled. Kyle, I'm not going to fight you. Fighting is for people who matter to each other, people who have something worth fighting over. You're not worth the assault charge or the bruised knuckles. You're not worth anything at all, really, except as a cautionary tale. I stood up slowly, reaching for my wallet and pulling out a $20 bill that I laid on top of the credit card statement. That's for my beer, which I didn't actually drink because I don't want to spend any more time in your presence than absolutely necessary. But here's what is going to happen. You're going to stay away from Lauren. You're going to stay away from my children. You're going to stay away from my house and my family and anything that has ever belonged to me. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure every real estate agency in this state knows about your habit of sleeping with married clients and accepting gifts purchased with funds that aren't legally yours to receive. I'm going to make sure the IRS knows about the unreported income you've been enjoying, and I'm going to make it my personal mission to ensure that your professional reputation is so thoroughly destroyed that you'll be lucky to get a job selling timeshares to drunk tourists. Kyle's face had gone from pale to red, his jaw clenching with impotent anger. You can't prove any of that. You don't know what you're talking about. I can prove all of it, I replied calmly. I have documentation, timestamps, geolocation data, credit card receipts, text message logs that you thought were deleted but weren't, and about 15 different ways to make your life a living nightmare. So here's my advice, Kyle. Take the warning and walk away. Disappear from my life completely and immediately, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. Keep pushing, and I'll push back so hard you'll spend the next 5 years trying to rebuild a career that I'll make sure stays buried. I turned and walked out of Harbor Line without waiting for a response, leaving Kyle sitting there with his friends staring at him with new calculation in their eyes, probably wondering what other lies he told them and whether his friendship was worth being associated with someone who was about to become toxic waste in their social circle. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, cool and clean after the stale beer atmosphere of the bar, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. But I wasn't done. There was still the performance at Lauren's office party to get through, the public appearance where I could control the narrative before she twisted it into something that painted me as the villain and her as the victim of an unhappy marriage. The event was a week away, some charity fundraiser that Lauren's marketing firm was hosting, and she'd texted me 4 days earlier asking me to come, presumably to show everyone that we were still the perfect couple and that nothing was wrong. I'd agreed to go, much to her obvious relief and confusion, and spent the intervening days letting her stew in uncertainty about what I might say or do. Lauren kept trying to have conversations about our situation, as she called it, wanting to negotiate terms before involving lawyers, suggesting couples therapy and separation instead of divorce, dangling possibilities like someone trying to bargain with a hostage taker. I stayed polite, non-committal, and absolutely unwavering in my core position. She had destroyed our marriage, and now we were dealing with the aftermath. The charity event was at some overpriced venue downtown, all exposed brick and industrial chic, the kind of place that charged $200 a plate for food that wouldn't fill up a teenager. Lauren had pulled out all the stops, wearing an emerald green dress that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage and makeup that couldn't quite hide the stress lines around her eyes. She'd lost weight in the past week, her face looking a bit too sharp, her movements carrying a manic energy that suggested she was running on anxiety and possibly wine. When I arrived, fashionably on time rather than early to help her like I used to, Lauren immediately attached herself to my side like a barnacle, her smile frozen in place, her hand gripping my arm with what probably looked like affection, but felt like a drowning person grabbing for a life raft. She introduced me around to her colleagues and clients, maintaining a constant stream of nervous chatter about how busy we'd both been, how work was crazy, how we never get enough time together anymore. But that's just modern life, right? I played along perfectly, being the supportive husband, shaking hands with her senior partners, asking interested questions about projects and campaigns, being exactly the kind of spouse that reflects well on your professional image. I watched Lauren relax fractionally as the evening wore on, and I didn't cause the scene she'd been dreading. Watched her start to believe that maybe she could pull this off, that maybe we could maintain the facade long enough for her to figure out her next move. Then Jonathan Hendricks approached us, one of the senior partners at the firm, a distinguished guy in his early 60s who looked like he'd stepped out of a whiskey commercial. He'd always liked me, or at least liked my ability to make intelligent conversation about sports and technology, and he greeted me with genuine warmth and a firm handshake. "Garrett, good to see you," Jonathan said, slapping me on the shoulder. "How long has it been? Last year's event?" "Something like that," I agreed, accepting the glass of wine he pressed into my hand, even though I had no intention of drinking it. "Work's been keeping me pretty occupied lately." "I can imagine," Jonathan said, his expression turning sympathetic in that way that made alarm bells start ringing in Lauren's head. I could feel her grip tighten on my arm. "Lauren mentioned you've had some family situations requiring your attention. Nothing serious, I hope?" This was my moment, the opening I'd been waiting for. I could have let it pass, could have deflected with a vague platitude and kept up the facade. Instead, I looked Jonathan straight in the eye and spoke with the kind of quiet sincerity that makes people lean in closer to hear. "It's been challenging," I said honestly, my voice carrying just enough weight to indicate that something was genuinely wrong without being dramatic. "It's hard to focus on work when you discover financial irregularities in your household accounts. Large amounts of money going toward purchases you weren't aware of, expenses that turn out to be funding someone else's lifestyle. But we're working through it. Lauren's going through a difficult emotional period right now, making some choices that are impacting the whole family, but I'm trying to be supportive while protecting our children's interests." I watched Jonathan's expression shift from polite interest to concern to something that looked like dawning comprehension. His eyes flickered to Lauren, who had gone completely still beside me, her face frozen in horror, and then back to me. The music and conversation around us continued, but I could see the information processing behind his eyes, the professional implications and personal judgments forming in real time. "I see," Jonathan said carefully, his tone suggesting he saw quite a bit more than I'd explicitly stated. "That does sound challenging. If there's anything the firm can do to support you both during this time, please don't hesitate to reach out. We value our employees' well-being, both professional and personal." I appreciate that, Jonathan, I replied, setting down my untouched wine glass. Lauren's fortunate to work for a company that prioritizes integrity and ethical behavior. I'm sure those values will guide everyone's decisions moving forward. It was a perfectly innocuous statement that also happened to be loaded with enough subtext to sink a battleship. I excused myself to visit the restroom, leaving Lauren standing there with Jonathan, knowing that the conversation I'd just initiated would spread through the firm like wildfire, that by Monday morning everyone would have heard some version of Lauren Wilson's having an affair and stealing money, and that her professional reputation would be irreparably damaged. Was it cruel? Probably. But so was stealing from your children's college fund to buy gifts for your boyfriend. So was public humiliation at a beach. So was 6 months of lies and gaslighting and treating me like I was the problem for noticing what she was doing. I'd matched her energy, nothing more. And if she couldn't handle the consequences of her choices, that wasn't my problem to solve anymore. I found Lauren waiting by the coat check when I emerged, her face blotchy with angry tears, mascara starting to run despite her best efforts to hold it together. She grabbed my arm and yanked me toward a quieter corner, her nails digging into my jacket sleeve hard enough that I probably had marks underneath. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You just destroyed my career. Do you have any idea what you just did? Jonathan is going to tell everyone, and they're all going to think I'm some kind of thief and a cheater, and my reputation is ruined. You destroyed your own reputation when you decided to sleep with a client and steal money to fund the affair," I replied evenly, pulling my arm free from her grip. "I simply told the truth when asked a direct question. Would you have preferred I lie for you? Continue covering up your behavior while you got to keep playing the successful career woman with a devoted husband? Those days are over, Lauren. You don't get to have it both ways anymore." "You're doing this to punish me," she accused, jabbing her finger toward my chest without quite touching me. "You want to ruin my life because your ego is bruised. You can't handle that I found someone who actually appreciates me, who makes me feel alive instead of just existing. So you're trying to destroy everything I've built." "I'm protecting what you've been trying to destroy," I corrected her. "Our children's future, our financial security, my dignity. Those aren't things you get to sacrifice at the altar of your midlife crisis, no matter how alive Kyle makes you feel. And speaking of Becca, you should know she's been telling people you borrowed money from her to try to cover up the amounts you took from our accounts." "Some friend." Lauren's eyes went wide with shock, then narrow with fury, and I could see the cracks forming in her support system. The realization that the people she'd been leaning on were just as flawed and self-serving as she'd become. She opened her mouth to say something else, probably something cutting and cruel. But I was already walking away, heading for the exit in the cool night air, and the drive home to my children who were blissfully unaware that their mother had just lost her last shred of professional credibility. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later, at what was supposed to be a neutral meeting location, but turned out to be a carefully orchestrated ambush. Lauren had sent me a text asking if we could meet at the lake house, just the two of us, to talk about everything like adults without lawyers present. The lake house was a cabin that Lauren's parents had left her when they'd passed, a place about an hour outside the city that we used to use for weekend getaways before life got too complicated. I'd agreed to the meeting, knowing full well it was probably a trap, but curious to see what strategy she'd come up with. I pulled up to the cabin at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday, having left the kids with my sister for the day, and immediately spotted 2 additional cars in the driveway. One I recognized as Becca's SUV, the other was Kyle's Mercedes, and I had to hand it to Lauren for her predictability. Of course she'd brought backup. Of course she couldn't face me alone. And of course she'd chosen the 2 people most invested in maintaining the lie that what she'd done was justified. I walked into the cabin carrying a briefcase that looked professional and lawyerish, though it actually just contained the massive file of evidence I'd compiled over the past 3 weeks. Lauren was sitting on the couch looking like she'd been crying for hours, tissues scattered around her like tragic stage dressing. Becca stood by the fireplace in full aggressive defender mode, arms crossed over her chest and expression ready for battle. Kyle was pacing by the windows, trying to look casual but coming across as nervous, his usual swagger noticeably absent. "We want to talk about this civilly," Becca started before I'd even closed the door behind me, jumping right into her prepared speech. What you're doing to Lauren is emotional abuse. You're controlling the money, you're trying to take her children, you're destroying her reputation at work. This has to stop, Garrett. You need to accept that marriages end sometimes, and you can't punish Lauren for being honest about her feelings. I set my briefcase on the coffee table with a heavy thud that made everyone jump slightly, then took off my jacket and folded it carefully over the back of a chair before responding. The silence stretched out, making them uncomfortable, and I let it hang there because I was in no rush, and they clearly were. Done? I asked Becca politely once it was clear she'd run out of steam on her opening argument. Because I have some documents I'd like to review before we continue this conversation. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the first folder, which was labeled simply Financial Fraud. I set it on the table facing them, the tab clearly visible. Then came digital evidence, followed by witness statements, and finally legal options. 4 folders, each thick with documentation, each representing a different aspect of Lauren's betrayal laid out in excruciating detail. This isn't about feelings, Becca, I said, still maintaining that calm, professional tone. This isn't about a marriage that naturally ended because 2 people grew apart. This is about systematic financial theft, documented adultery, and a pattern of lies that endangered our children's future. So before we talk about abuse, let's talk about what abuse actually looks like. I opened the first folder and pulled out a spreadsheet that I'd created, color-coded and highlighted, showing every withdrawal, every suspicious charge, every transfer that Lauren had made over the past 6 months. The total at the bottom was circled in red, $47,612. This is what Lauren took from our savings account, I said, sliding the spreadsheet across the table toward where she sat. Money that was supposed to be for Leo and Mia's college funds, for our retirement, for emergencies. Instead, it paid for hotel rooms where you two, I nodded at Lauren and Kyle without looking at them, conducted your affair. It paid for dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford. It paid for gifts, for trips, for maintaining the illusion that Kyle was more successful than he actually is. This isn't about control, Becca. This is about theft. Lauren's face had gone completely white, and I saw her hands start to shake. Kyle had stopped pacing and was staring at the spreadsheet like it might bite him. Only Becca maintained her defensive stance, though her expression had shifted from self-righteous anger to something more uncertain. That money was in a joint account, Lauren tried weakly. I had every right to use it. For legitimate family expenses, yes, I agreed. But this wasn't legitimate. This was fraud. And before you argue about semantics, I should mention that I've already consulted with both a forensic accountant and a divorce attorney who specializes in financial misconduct. They both agreed that this pattern of behavior constitutes misappropriation of marital assets and could potentially be considered felony theft depending on how a prosecutor wanted to handle it. I let that sink in for a moment before opening the second folder, which contained printouts of text messages, photos with geolocation data, and email exchanges that detailed the affair in explicit detail. I didn't need to show them everything. The sheer volume of documentation was enough to make my point. This is 2 years of digital evidence, I continued. Not 6 months. 2 years. The affair started long before I consciously acknowledged it, and you. I looked directly at Becca for the first time. You knew about it from the beginning. You encouraged it. You covered for her. You lied to me directly on at least 6 occasions that I can document, providing alibis for girls' trips that were actually weekend getaways with Kyle. Becca's face flushed red, and she uncrossed her arms, her defensive posture crumbling. I was supporting my friend. That's what friends do. Friends don't help each other destroy their families, I replied. Friends don't enable financial fraud. Friends don't participate in elaborate deceptions that harm innocent children. What you did wasn't friendship, Becca. It was accessory to betrayal. And just so you know, your husband might be interested in some of these documents, particularly the ones where you discuss your own marital problems and how you're thinking of following Lauren's example with that personal trainer from your gym. The color drained from Becca's face, and I felt a momentary flash of satisfaction watching her realize that her own secrets weren't as secret as she'd believed. I'd found those messages buried in the same cloud backup that had revealed Lauren's affair. Conversations where Becca had been planning her own betrayal with the same casual disregard for consequences that Lauren had shown. Kyle finally spoke up, his voice lacking its usual cocky confidence. Look, man, I didn't know she was stealing money. She told me she had her own income, that the account was hers to use. I didn't know any of this. You accepted expensive gifts from a married woman and didn't question where the money came from? I asked him incredulously. You spent weekends at five-star hotels and never wondered how a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm could afford it? Either you're lying or you're criminally stupid, and I'm not sure which is worse. But here's what you need to understand, Kyle. I have documentation of every gift you received, every meal you ate, every hotel room you stayed in. And all of that becomes evidence in a divorce proceeding, which means you get to explain to a judge why you thought it was appropriate to accept what amounts to stolen property. Kyle sank down into a chair, his usual bravado completely deflated, and I could see him running calculations about what this meant for his professional reputation, his client relationships, his carefully cultivated image as a successful bachelor who took what he wanted. Here are my terms, I said, pulling out the fourth folder and opening it to reveal a document that I'd prepared with my attorney. This is a proposed divorce settlement that Lauren is going to sign today, right now, without negotiation or delay. I read through the terms slowly and clearly, watching Lauren's face cycle through denial, anger, and finally defeated acceptance as she realized she had no leverage. No cards left to play, no way out of the situation she'd created. 1. Immediate divorce with no contest. Lauren signs acknowledgement that the marriage is irretrievably broken due to her adultery and financial misconduct. 2. Primary custody of Leo and Mia goes to me. Lauren gets supervised visitation every other weekend, with the possibility of unsupervised visits after she completes a minimum of 6 months of therapy to address her decision-making and the impact of her choices on the children. 3. Lauren repays the $47,000 she stole from our savings account. She can sell her jewelry, her car, whatever assets she needs to liquidate. I don't care how she gets the money, but it will be repaid within 90 days or I pursue criminal charges. 4. I buy out Lauren's share of the house at market value, minus her debt to the marital estate. She walks away with approximately $30,000 in equity after the calculations, which is generous considering the alternative is me pursuing legal action that leaves her with nothing. 5. Most importantly, Becca and Kyle, you two need to understand something very clearly. If I see either of you within a kilometer of my children, if I hear about you contacting them, if you show up at their school or their activities or anywhere in their world, I will destroy you both. Not physically because I'm not interested in assault charges, but professionally, socially, and legally. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what role you played in this disaster. I will make sure Kyle's real estate license gets reviewed for ethical violations. I will make sure Becca's husband knows everything, and I will make both of your lives so thoroughly miserable that you'll wish you'd never met my wife. The silence in the room was absolute. Lauren was crying openly now, her facade of control completely shattered, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto the couch cushions. Becca looked like she was going to be sick, her hand pressed against her stomach, her eyes wide with shock. Kyle just sat there staring at the floor, probably running through all the ways his life was about to become significantly more complicated. You can't do this, Lauren whispered, her voice breaking. You can't take my children from me. I love them. I made mistakes, but I love them. They need their mother. They need a mother who puts them first, I corrected her gently, and for the first time in the entire conversation, I felt something other than cold fury. I felt sad, genuinely sad, for what we'd lost and what our children were going to grow up without. They need a parent who doesn't steal their future to fund an affair. They need stability and honesty and someone who's going to be there for them without conditions. Right now, Lauren, that's not you. Maybe someday it will be again, after you've done the work to figure out why you made these choices and how to make better ones. But today you sign these papers and you accept the consequences of your actions. Or I take all of this evidence to the police and the district attorney and we see how they feel about marital fraud. Lauren reached for the pen with shaking hands, her tears falling onto the document as she signed her name on line after line, agreeing to terms that would reshape her entire life. Becca had backed away toward the door, clearly wanting to escape this nightmare she'd helped create. Kyle looked like he was contemplating whether he could slip out unnoticed, but I caught his eye and shook my head slightly. Nobody was leaving until this was done. When Lauren finished signing, I collected the documents carefully, putting them back in my briefcase with the precision of someone handling evidence at a crime scene. Then I looked at all three of them. These people who had been fixtures in my life for the past year, who had eaten at my table and played with my children, and all the while had been working to undermine everything I'd built. I want you all to understand something, I said quietly, my voice carrying weight despite its low volume. This didn't have to happen this way. Lauren, you could have asked for a divorce if you were unhappy. You could have been honest about your feelings, and we could have ended things like adults, protecting the kids and splitting things fairly. Instead, you chose deception and theft and public humiliation. You made these choices, and now you get to live with them. I turned to Becca and Kyle. And you two enabled this disaster every step of the way. Becca, you helped her lie and plan and steal, all while pretending to be my friend too, smiling at me at barbecues and school events while knowing exactly what was happening behind my back. Kyle, you knew she was married, knew she had kids, and you took what she offered without caring about the destruction you were causing. You're both complicit in this mess, and if you think I'm going to just forget about that and move on, you're wrong. I'm going to remember. And if you ever come near my family again, I will make you both regret the day you met Lauren Wilson. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door, my jacket over my arm, ready to leave this chapter of my life behind and start building something new from the wreckage. As I reached for the door handle, I heard Lauren's voice, small and broken, calling after me. Garrett, please, is there anything I can do? Anything to make this right? I paused without turning around, considering the question seriously. Was there anything she could do? Could she unspend the money? Unsleep with Kyle? Undo the lies and the betrayal and the fundamental breaking of trust that had defined the last 2 years of our marriage? Could she rewind time and make different choices? Be the person she'd promised to be when we stood in front of our friends and family and swore to honor each other? Get help, Lauren, I said finally, still not looking back at her. Real help, from a real therapist, not just crisis counseling to get through the divorce. Figure out why you did this. Figure out what broke inside you that made you think any of this was acceptable. And maybe if you do that work and you become someone our children can trust again, you'll get to be a real part of their lives someday. But that's up to you now. I can't fix you, can't save you, can't do anything except protect Leo and Mia from the fallout of your choices. The rest is on you. I walked out into the late afternoon sun, leaving behind the sounds of Lauren's crying and Becca's attempt to comfort her and Kyle's muttered cursing about how everything had gone wrong. I climbed into my car, set my briefcase on the passenger seat, and just sat there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. Behind me, through the cabin windows, I could see the three of them starting to turn on each other. The alliance of convenience beginning to fracture now that there was no common enemy to unite against. I heard Becca's voice rise in anger, something about being dragged into this mess and having her own life ruined. Kyle's deeper voice responded, defensive and accusatory, blaming Lauren for not being honest about the money. And Lauren's voice rising above both of theirs in a shriek of frustration and pain, screaming that they'd promised to support her, that they'd said Garrett would just accept it and move on, that this was all supposed to work out differently. I started the engine and backed out of the driveway slowly, carefully, like I was leaving behind a toxic waste site that required caution and distance. In my rearview mirror, the lake house grew smaller and smaller, and with it the life I'd thought I was living, the marriage I'd believed in, the trust I'd invested in all the wrong people.